So good morning, guys. My name is Penny. I am the Senior Mentor Coordinator for New Mornings. Welcome. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Ulverston. I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for deciding to do this training. Um, we will go through this training step by step. I'll be with you the whole time. If you have any questions, please call me or email me. And hopefully we will do some Zoom chats. If you don't know how to do Zoom chats, that's okay. We will work on that together. We'll also have at the very end of our training a group get together where we will actually see each other in person, and we'll have a bit of do some role plays and some fun things like that. Nothing scary, please don't freak out. We really try to be an inclusive, encouraging, friendly kind of organisation, and I think that kind of follows through in our training. So just to start off, I'll tell you a little bit about me. My name's Penny Clark. I live in Ulverston. Me and my husband Adam have lived in Ulverston for about, how old's my son? About 8 years now, so that's pretty cool. Originally, I grew up in the East Coast in St Mary's. I moved to Launceston when I was 16. I went to college, university, and here I met my husband when I was at uni. So Adam's a teacher. I went to art school, and then I went to uni to become an art teacher and an English teacher. After that, I did some teaching, and I suppose for me, I worked a lot with the vulnerable students in high schools primarily. Um, I just started to get a real heart for young people, and I suppose for me, I realised that we as adults have such influence over young people. I worked a lot with vulnerable kids. Eventually, we moved to Ulverston and I worked at Leyland's as the art teacher before my husband and I did some travelling and had an amazing experience. When we came back, I think the whole travelling experience changed me, and I ended up doing chaplaincy at Ulverston Primary School. And that was really defining for me. I had two children, so my son Archie is 7, and then we fostered a little girl who is still with us. When she was 6 months old, she came into our care, and I think for me that was the most profound experience, really realizing and living with a little person who had been through significant trauma. And I was very blessed to have a conversation with Alison Wishaw, who was the founding person of New Mornings. And I started working for New Mornings 3 years ago. So I've learned a lot. The New Mornings training has helped me in my life. It's helped me with my children, with my marriage, with my friendships. It's made a profound impact on me, and I'm very blessed to now be in the role of the Senior Mentor Coordinator. I have other coordinators that I'm responsible for, and I also oversee the SWIFT program, which is working with families who are vulnerable or who have come back from a background of significant trauma. So SWIFT stands for Supporting Wellness in Families Together. So I'm also the community outreach person for New Mornings. I work part-time. I live in West Ulverston. I love art. I love music, drawing, gardening, exercise, and I suppose, but mostly, and through all of this, I love Jesus, and his impact on my life from a young person has truly, truly carried me through all the ups and downs and the difficulties. He has been a rock and a constant source of strength for me. So that's a bit about me. Now, usually we would have some sort of icebreaker where we would get to know each other, but unfortunately we'll have to save that for our Zoom meeting. So maybe just have a little think about what you might like to share about yourself when we all come together. Now, hopefully you all have your beautiful mentor manual, which is back to front. And before you ask, these are not my children. They do look a lot like my children. And I think when I chose the photo, I was kind of subconsciously thinking of my children, Archie and Layla, but it's not. So everything you need for this course is in this manual. The manual, incidentally, was written by myself, a social worker, a psychologist, and a GP, Dr. Alison Wishel. So it's thoroughly expert knowledge, I suppose. So you will see you have your table of contents inside. We will go through all these modules. I have pre-recorded them all, which was thrilling. And very shortly, we will start the very first module, which is the introduction to training. So that will go through what we'll be doing together, why we'll be doing it, who New Mornings are, what are our values, all that sort of thing. That will be our very first module. So I hope that this will be an enjoyable experience for you. I hope you don't feel isolated or overwhelmed. Often these days are heavy. I won't lie to you. Some of the content that we do go through, it can leave us with a feeling of burdensomeness. But the main thing I want to encourage you is that ultimately through all of this, it is such a message of hope. That is the one thing I want to communicate. Mentoring is such a message of hope. And I've been privileged to see, as all our mentors have, how mentoring has dramatically and astronomically impacted children. And I can tell you so many stories, and I hope to tell you stories because I love stories, as to how mentoring has made a difference. And my hope and my prayer is that you'll walk away from this feeling empowered and excited and full of hope for you and for your mentee. So let's get started. Welcome to Introduction to Mentoring. So as I mentioned in our first little clip, this is module 1. So you're right at the start, feeling enthusiastic, excited, ready to go. Right, okay, the first thing I'll share is just a few training guidelines, and you'll see that everything I'm talking about is actually, or ought to be, or maybe in your manual. Sometimes some of the slides that I'm reading off right now might not have the exact same information. If that is the case and there's something I say and you think I really would like a copy of that, I can get that to you. Otherwise, it's just so much printing. This PowerPoint that I'm reading off has millions of slides. So do write a little note in your manual and ask me that anytime. So training guidelines, things that we really need to hold as important as we go into our mentor training. The first thing is maintain confidentiality. So anything that we talk about in our Zoom meetings, anything that might come up during our training, or even when we collectively kind of get together at the end, we really want to keep that confidential. So we're not sort of telling our friends different stories. It's a really important practice, because when you do have your mentee, that confidentiality will need to extend to them. Be present. So quite easy when you're watching a clip, it's kind of easy to sort of phase out or focus on what I'm saying half the time while you're doing something else. I really encourage you just to find some quiet space while you're doing this training. If you need to pause me, I would rather you pause and come back when you're feeling clear than not. We don't test you on the information, but I will ask specific questions when we have our Zoom meetings about the content, just to see if it's absorbed and to see how it's kind of bouncing around in you. So it is important to kind of take it in. Speak from your heart and listen from your heart. Really important, especially some of the more controversial topics that will come up. We have so many defenses, and often our first instinct is to be reactive and judgmental. And it's just so important during this training to have an open heart, and to also speak if you're having an issue or if there's something that's troubling you in the training, to speak that out from the heart. Respect our differences. We are all different. The way I see the world is completely different to how half of you probably see the world. There's age, there's race, there's gender, all sorts of things, not to mention our kind of genetic neurobiological makeup. It's just also different. So it's important that we respect each other's differences. Ask questions, please ask questions. Don't feel like there's no question that's too silly. When we do our training, we get interrupted all the time, and often what we're trying to say kind of gets interwoven into the training. This is a little bit different. So this is kind of just me kind of spurting all the information onto you. So I do encourage you, just take notes, and we can chat about them when we have our Zoom catch-ups. So while I'm on that, when we do our Zoom catch-ups, I will be the host. We have an unlimited capacity for Zoom meetings. They can go on for a very long time. We can kind of come up with a time that suits everybody. We can do them at night. We can do them on weekends. I'm completely flexible there. Probably the main thing is there will be some sort of structure to the meetings. Otherwise, I mean, with me, they could just go on forever. So it will probably be question time, content time, and then maybe some quizzing time where I might just ask you some specific questions about the content. And lastly is enjoy yourself. Try really hard to enjoy yourself. I know training can sometimes be a bit of a drag, but hopefully, like I said, with stories and with different things, we can make it as interactive as possible in this sort of space. So, mentoring, the introduction. I suppose it's important to think about why you're here. So, what is a mentor? And you'll see there is a section in your manuals where we have module 1, Introduction to Mentoring. We have the question, have you ever had a mentor? What is a mentor? And then we have a definition of mentoring. So, what I would like you to do now is to pop me on pause and to go through those 2 questions, and then we'll come back and have a chat about your answers. Some of you might have answers such as friend, safe person, role model, all sorts of different things. It's important to look at what our mentors actually, what we define our mentors as. And you'll see the last quote there is from us as an organisation, and it says mentoring is a long-term caring relationship in which trust and connection are built up over time, and the mentor helps their mentee to develop their potential. That's probably the best explanation that we can give. When we do our agreement meetings with our mentees, I talk a lot about potential. I think it's just so important that our mentees right from the get-go have this feeling they haven't been singled out because they're naughty, because lots of them aren't, and they haven't been singled out because they're weird or because their family are poor. They've actually been singled out because they have bucket loads of potential, and mentoring is something that can kind of bring out that potential. So that's a really important point to kind of take note. You know, you're not here because you're going to be assigned with the naughty kids. You're here because we have referrals, so many referrals for students that are just not being given the opportunity to reach their potential, and mentoring is one of the many ways we can help with that. So that's an important exercise. The next question is, what does a student mentor actually do? And again, pop me on pause and just write what you think they do. We've actually given you some of the answers there. Mentoring can look different for multiple mentors. We often have a bit of a scenario where occasionally, you know, we have an opportunity for our mentors to get together. And it can be a bit discouraging for some mentors because for them and their mentee, throwing the frisbee, that's their thing. And they do that like every single week. And they both love it. They both really enjoy it. And for other mentors, they might come in and say, you know, we built a massive model and we made a go-kart and we are constantly doing engineering, and there can be this comparison that can happen from time to time with mentors. And it's so important that mentoring can look so different because we're all so different. That's the funny thing. So student mentors can do whatever activities are going to bring out that potential for the mentee. So another thing that we sometimes think about, or that we often think about in New Mornings, pretty much all we think about, are why might young people in the Northwest Coast need a mentor? Um, there are lots of reasons, and this is probably a point in time where we would have a bit of a brainstorm, but I can just give you the answers. The reasons are, I'm just looking for them. The reasons are that they can be biological reasons. So they can, the mentee might have come from some sort of hereditary background, in which they might have a disability, they might have a learning disability, there might be some sort of damage that might have happened when their mum was pregnant. It can also be environmental, so things like dysfunctional families, social stresses, drug use, alcohol, mental illness. There are so many reasons. And of course, the psychological reasons, so the trauma from abuse and neglect. So many reasons. And I think there is a statistic somewhere that we often refer to, which is the northwest coast of Tasmania has something like one of the highest percentages of low social socio status, especially in the northwest coast. So we are right where we need to be. Mentoring, in your manual, you'll see there are a few different factors that we take into consideration when we're mentoring, and I'll leave those for you to read in your own time. But the protective factors and the resilience, they're two really important things to remember when you're mentoring. So protective factor, there's this guy, oh no, that's the next bit. The protective factor is basically putting something in place to protect or to grow a characteristic. So mentoring can facilitate with nurturing that climate for the students. So they can build connection with you. There's a higher chance they'll build richer connection with their teacher. If they build a richer connection with their teacher, they might work a little bit better in school. And we've seen this happen just so many times. A student might build a connection with their mentor, and then they're able to relate to their peers better. So that's a protective factor. The second thing is resilience. So we talk a lot about resilience at New Mornings, and especially this guy, Andrew Fuller, who's this wonderful person. He's a clinical psychologist, done a lot of stuff with kids. And he talks about 4 things, not 3, 4 things that can help a child succeed in life. Feeling loved and cared about by their family, feeling accepted by their peers, a feeling of connectedness at school, and having an adult person outside the family taking a real positive interest in them. So those 4 things kind of encapsulate in so many ways what mentoring has the potential to do. And you might be thinking, but how? Well, the reason is if you think about the 4th one, so having an adult outside of the family taking a positive interest, well, that's the 4th one. We can cross that off because that's the mentor. The 3rd one, you might be thinking, Penny, how can it help their connectedness at school? Well, the thing is, when you have a mentor, suddenly your status rises, especially in primary school. You're no longer seen as the little person that's always getting in trouble, or the little person or the student that's off to the principal's office. Suddenly you have a mentor. And when you have a mentor, you're not actually like down, you're actually up. You're really cool if you have a mentor. This is partly because our mentors are so great that when a mentor comes into a school, you're automatically treated like some sort of rock star. So if you are the one that's been singled out to have potential and to have a mentor, suddenly you're like this different person. You know, you have potential, you've been singled out. When you have that, you also have more capacity to engage with your teacher. You're having this lovely rapport with your mentor that transfers to your teacher. Suddenly you're doing a little bit better in school. You might do a lot of reading with your mentee. And then they're able to read things they couldn't read before, which makes them feel more connected to school. One of my favourite stories, though, as an example of how mentoring can increase connectedness at school, is this. We had a mum who had other children, and when it was time for her agreement meeting, her eldest child was in grade 4. So she had lots of other kids. And the school had tried and tried to engage with this mum. She was lovely, but she was just disengaged with the whole schooling process. And she would drop her kids off at kindergarten for the first day, and they wouldn't see her at all until ever. So this mum was called to ask if she'd like to come in for an agreement meeting for her eldest son, who, like I said, was in grade 4. So she was really excited. She came into the school, she met the teachers, she met the mentor. She was there for the agreement meeting, was really happy. Everything was great. And after that mum felt safe and able to come back into the school. She had the connection with the staff member who was awesome and decided to just seize the day. And so she invited her to parent help. And this mum had never, ever felt like, I don't know, maybe confidence, maybe she was really shy, maybe she had anxiety, but something about that agreement meeting made her feel like this school actually cares about my child and is invested in my child. Maybe I could give something back. So that's just such a wonderful story of how mentoring can increase that feeling of connectedness within a school. The second one, you might be thinking, well, how can they help with peers? How can mentors possibly help with peers? Well, the really cool thing is that, like I said, that protective factor. So when a mentor and a mentee are having a great time, often they talk a fair bit, kids talk a fair bit about their friendship problems. I might say, I called such and such a doofus and he punched me in the face, so I called him something worse, and then blah, blah, blah. You might think, well, that's really scary, but the opportunity to speak into that is right there. So you can, as a mentor, you can model friendship. You can be that, how kids sometimes don't listen to their parents, but they listen to someone else. You can be that someone else and say, wow, you called me doofus. Do you think that was a really, helpful idea? And what happened? I wonder what happened to make that happen. And I wonder how he felt. It's just a wonderful opportunity to kind of chip away at some of these constantly reactive behaviours that a lot of our mentees are stuck in. Um, the other option is sometimes in mentoring once a term, we give mentees the option of inviting a friend to come to mentoring with you. Now, if that idea of that totally freaks you out, you don't have to do it, but sometimes it's a way to just allow your mentee to interact with a peer with you there. And so you can coach them. If they're doing something that is not going to be a good friend thing, you can coach them through that. So again, that's a way of increasing that capacity to feel accepted by their peers. And then the last one, so feeling loved and cared about by the family. And I suppose this really links into what Swift is all about. So from mentoring, we just noticed that mentors and the mentees' parents kept connecting. And we wouldn't ask mentors to, it just kept happening. There was this kind of constant accidental bumping in the supermarket, or every time they'd catch up for agreement meetings once a year, it was really lovely, and they'd say, let's get a coffee. And so that was kind of where Swift was sort of born. It was this organic process between a mentor and the mentee's parents. So that's sort of what Swift was all about. And my role as the community outreach worker is to kind of make some of those connections happen and to foster them when they do happen. So if there was an opportunity where you as a mentor were able to connect even really slightly with a mother of your mentee, then that has the capacity for your mentee to feel more loved and to more cared about by their family. And again, one of my favourite stories is a beautiful mum who was just really struggling with life in general. Her daughter would walk to school every single morning, probably about 3Ks, and rain, hail, or shine, she would walk to school. No bus, no taxi. And she would get her siblings organised as well. So very sad. She got a mentor, and that mentor met with the mother at the agreement meeting. And we have an option that you can exchange phone numbers. And this mentor was a nurse, and she felt like she could exchange phone numbers with the mentee's mum. And so they did. And nothing bad happened. It was all very safe, two adults. And every now and then, the mentor would message the mum and say, how are you going? And are you going with your little one? And blah, blah, blah. Anyway, One of the goals in our agreement meeting was for the student to be on school on time. She was notoriously late, often coming in at like 11 o'clock. And mum just didn't have the capacity or the education or the awareness. I don't know. It was just something wasn't there for her to get her kids up and ready for school. So I coached the mentor, and together we came up with this idea of a schedule. It was super easy, just a laminated chart, and all the student had to do was tick off when she'd done her jobs, and that was that. And so she took it home, and the mentor met with mum at Macca's and showed her the chart and said to mum, do you think this is a good idea? And I'd really like to help you and your daughter with this. Well, the mum just felt so overwhelmed with love and so cared for. They'd already built this relationship, the mentor and the mentee's mum. And honestly, to this day, that student is never late. That was 3 years ago. They still have the chart, and it's become such a habit now. She doesn't even need the chart. Her mum and her have a much richer relationship because of the mentee. So, sorry, the mentor. So it is that's probably my favorite example of how, if you wanted to invest in your mentee's family, it is such a wonderful opportunity to make a difference. Now, that's not to say that there are mentors who don't, and there definitely are mentors who don't have anything to do with their mentee's family. You don't have to be that person. Um, some mentees' families are not really keen on the idea. Some mentees' families will love you, and you will really get that sense that they want to engage with you. But honestly, some are just not ready, or they're not ready yet. There has been some families that we've been working with, and at the start they didn't really want anything to do with the mentor, but gradually as time went on and this mentor sort of stuck around, they started to see the worth of getting to know the mentor. So um, that's a little bit of an example of how those 4 things have worked for us as New Mornings and within the mentoring program. So there's a little clip now I really want you to look. So if you go back to your email that I sent you, you'll see that there's a clip that says a little more about resilience. It's a YouTube clip. I want you to click on that, and then we'll have a little chat about it after you've watched it. As you can see from that clip, resilience is really tied into an older person taking an interest in a child in a really positive way. And it's just really interesting when you think about the balance of the seesaw and how the more positive factors there are in a child's life, the more that scale can kind of tip up towards the positive. So lastly, the last little thing I want to have a little bit of a chat about are some of the desirable characteristics of a mentor. These are just a bunch of a list that we have come up with, which we feel really describes our mentors. They're just wonderful people, and there are also some kind of characteristics that we've noticed that can be really helpful for mentors to kind of develop over time. So you'll see that's just here on page 14, characteristics of mentor. So I'll just go through those quickly. So relaxed, the capacity to have fun, to be flexible, not being easily offended is really important. Some of our mentees, they just might say the wrong thing. They might speak without really thinking. Manners might not be a massive priority for a lot of our mentees. But just having the capacity kind of to be flexible and to not be too easily offended is really important. Being interested. So we think it's so important for mentors to be really interested in their mentees. Curious is a word we use a lot at New Mornings. Being open to new experiences. Your mentee might have lots of skills and talents in something you have nothing to do with, and it might be a little bit confronting, or you might feel a bit out of your comfort zone to sort of explore some of these new things. Being accepting. So we talk a lot about acceptance, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. Acceptance is just being gracious and patient and understanding that your mentee is who they are. They are who God created them to be, and they have being placed in your, I guess, pastoral hour once a week. So just accepting that they are who they are and that you can't come in and change their worlds just like that. But you can be caring. So being caring means being gentle, kind, compassionate, empathetic, and encouraging. So being reliable is another really important thing for our mentors. That means, if you say you'll do an activity, you follow through with the activity that you say you'll do. You try really hard to be consistently on time for your mentoring, and you're willing to respect the guidelines that New Mornings has set for you in our mentoring program, and also the school's guidelines as well. So making sure you follow the school rules and the school values. Being teachable. So that's just about being aware of what your own limitations are. We all have limitations. Being aware of what your limitations are, and being willing to give and receive feedback. So if you're finding, and this happens a lot, I'll get calls, and it will sometimes our mentors just get so stuck. They have no idea. They need a fresh set of eyes to look at something, and being willing to say, do you know what, this little bit isn't working. There's something that's just not, I'm not feeling good about this. What do you think, Penny? Or, what do you think, Kay? How ought I change this? That's all about being teachable rather than being, I guess, maybe judgmental or quick to blame. You're able to say, what can I do in this situation to make it a little bit better? Personal values are another really important thing. So we all have different values. We need to be tolerant and accepting of each other's differences. And sometimes or oftentimes your personal values will be challenged during mentoring. So it might be something like your mentee, one of their values in their family is to have material goods over food, which we will talk a little bit more about in generational poverty, which is next. That can be really confronting when you see a little person that is really hungry and they have the best brand new skate shoes. These things can be very confronting. So understanding that we have different values, and just being calm and reflective if they're being challenged, and personal resilience. So keeping God at the center of your mentoring time is absolutely vital. Keep your church and your Christian community around you. Make sure you have a good support network and be willing to practice self-care strategies because you will need them. As you add something like this into your life, there will be a level of depletion that will happen. So it's really, really important that you are willing to practice some self-care strategies. So I think that's pretty much the majority of Introduction to Mentoring, which, as I said, is our first module. Hopefully, having broken it up a little bit, it hasn't been too arduous for you. I just want to leave you with those quotes that are there on page 15 to have a read of now, and just to really allow those words as you read them from Josie and Julia Hill and Michelle Pearce. Have a real think about those quotes and maybe just hold them as you finish up this introductory session, to see how profound mentoring really is. So that's the end of your first session. This is the second part of Introduction to Mentoring. This is a long module, just so you know, but hopefully you can start to get a handle on it. These are just some really important things that I really wanted to cover with you because they are super crucial. So you might have thought you were finished with Introduction to Mentoring, and I sort of thought we were too, but when I looked at the manual, I thought, no, this is gold. We must cover this as well. So going on from the Introduction to Mentoring, there's biblical perspectives of mentoring. Now, what we're doing with that is I'll be sending you out a Word document that I'd like you to fill out and then send back to me. So what I'd like you to do is in your quiet time to go through biblical perspectives of mentoring Read the passages we've supplied and answer the questions. That's not a test. There's no pass or fail. Again, it's just to see how you're engaging with the course and how you're engaging with the material. So you'll see we have a beautiful yellow circle with lots of colours around it. These are the most, gosh, these things are really useful. And if you ever find in a few months down the track you're stuck with mentoring and you're not sure what to do, please come back to this page, page 19 and onwards. It will have all the answers to the questions that you're having if you're stuck. So we have communication, core values, commitment, caring for self, confidentiality, and clear boundaries. So I'm just going through those now so that we're all on the same page and so you know that we've told you everything. So commitment. Obviously, you're all here, you're hanging in with this sort of strange training where I'm talking at you all the time. You're obviously committed. Being consistent and continually consistent, like I said, is super important. We really need our mentors to commit to weekly mentoring sessions. Now, some of you will be traveling, some of you might become unwell, life happens. We totally understand that. But what we're asking is that if possible, you could commit to weekly visits to your mentee just so they really feel like you're there for them. Mentoring is not actually about you, and I know that you would all know this. Mentoring is about that little person out there that God has chosen for you to walk alongside. While it's not about you, there are so many benefits that will come your way through being a mentor. It's not about being a good mentor, or it's not about failing as a mentor. Lots of people come to us and they say, I just don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I have the skills, or what will I say, or how will I say it? And I just feel that those guys are the best mentors because their hearts are already so committed to the cause that they're worrying that they're not enough. But in actual fact, all you need to do is show up. That's it. And there are some strategies and there are some questions, but really showing up and loving, those are the most important things. So, a good mentor is one that actually puts the child before themselves and doesn't necessarily need to meet their own expectations. So if you come into mentoring and think, I'm going to become a mentor because I want to teach that student piano, then you're probably not going to be a good mentor because that student might not want to learn piano. Communication, that's the second one. Really, really important. We are not in the background if you don't want us to be. New Mornings, staff and volunteers are like an intermeshed weave. Like we are there for you as much as you need us to be. So you'll have access to your school mentor coordinator. So it might be me, it might be somebody else. You will have access to resources that we have at New Mornings. You can print things off, laminate. You can be as involved in New Mornings ministries as much as you'd like to be. We are always looking for volunteers. We are always looking for helpers. We will give you a school tour and show you where all the exits are and where to put your handbag and where the toilets are. We won't be leaving you on your own. You have an agreement meeting with the parents and the mentee and the staff. They will love you. It will be fine. You have a mentor review. So in the middle of the year, we'll meet for a cuppa, we'll have a chat about how the year's going, and you can have an opportunity to let us know how we're going in this mentoring process. So communication is really, really, really important. And if there's anything that's happening that's even slightly concerning you about your mentee, you've got to tell your mentor coordinator because we can't do anything if you don't tell us. Core values. So at New Mornings, we all have core values that we try to work towards. So practically, they're based on the Bible, some truths in the Bible, which we really hope that you guys will agree with. So practically supporting those in need, encouraging the disheartened, helping children to thrive, and practicing generosity through humility and service. So that's again on page 21. You can read as much as you'd like about New Morning's core values. We have our mission statement on the website as well as our vision for Ulverstone. So that's a really important thing to sort of keep in mind. Now on this, I have a short activity that I'd like you to pause me for. It's a values activity. It's on page 22, and you'll see that there's a big table with lots and lots of different values. However, they are written in sentence form, so you kind of won't know what your values are. So you'll see it's just this here. What I'd like you to do is to pop me on pause, and I want you to go through and rate them from 1 to 5. So 1 meaning not so important, whereas 5 is very important. I'd like you to do this now, and then we'll have a chat. Activity, I'd like you to just hold what your values are and what your numbers are, because when we have our first Zoom chat, we'll be talking about how diverse our values are and just unpacking what our values are. Then we'll be talking about how those values might be challenged during your mentoring time. So it's really important that you bring this manual. If you haven't got it now, just run and get it, and write in your values and bring it to your Zoom. So bring your manual to your Zoom because we'll need those values. Clear boundaries. This is probably the number one thing that I talk to mentors about are boundaries. It's super, super important. So boundaries refer to the expectations, guidelines, and limits within a relationship. We all have boundaries. They might be personal space boundaries, behavioral boundaries, just life boundaries. And some people find it really tricky to put boundaries in place with vulnerable children. Some people just find boundaries really tricky, like anytime. But boundaries are vital for a healthy mentoring relationship. I cannot stress this enough. You will just be so forever trying to catch up if you don't put boundaries in at the start. So poor boundaries can result in all kinds of strife. It can result in the mentor or the mentee feeling like he or she can't disagree with you, or that they are constantly being railroaded by you. It can cause anxiety or discomfort. The mentee just might not know where you stand. The mentor might feel like I have all these expectations that they can't live up to because they have to do this certain thing every single time. Whereas in reality, the mentor didn't actually put in the boundary from the start. It can start getting murky with one-sided relationships, with this feeling of like a giving, and the mentee taking. And really, I mean, you could have just said, I'm not doing that. So it's really important to think about your boundaries. Think about what you're willing to compromise on, and think about what you're just not going to budge with. And look, boundaries are tricky. I've had mentors who I never would have thought had issues with boundaries, have issues with boundaries because they work with the kids and they see the kids, and they're sometimes beautifully vulnerable, but they can definitely take mentors for a bit of a ride. So it's really important to, if you're starting getting this feeling of, I'm not comfortable with this, or like it says in the manual, I'll do this just one time, you just probably shouldn't do it. So an example, I can give you an example. One of my favorite examples was a mentor, wonderful person, had children, beautiful children, very strong, very confident mentor. And they had a mentee, and every week they would walk around the school and they'd go to play basketball, but they would never get there because the mentee would either find somebody to start swearing at, or would get really angry, or would just kind of wander away. This mentee had autism as well as a side. So it was a very difficult situation for him because there wasn't a lot of structure, and there weren't a lot of time limits, and there weren't a lot of boundaries around their time together. So when I had a chat to the mentor, they mentioned this, and so we put in some boundaries. We put in a visual schedule, a timetable, and an expectation that the student would need to comply with these boundaries, or mentoring just wouldn't happen on that day. just like that, things were different. The mentee was able to see where the boundary was, they were able to see how to work within that boundary, and the mentor didn't feel like they were being taken for such a ride. So for me, that was a really powerful lesson, and I actually emphasized and put this section in the manual because it made me think, yeah, this is big. As a teacher, boundaries are so important. And I know as a parent, the boundaries I set for my son, who hasn't come from a background of trauma, versus the boundaries we put in place for our foster daughter are incredibly different. And wishy-washy boundaries don't work if you're dealing with a child from a background of trauma. You can't say in a minute because it's very concrete and they might be looking at their watch waiting for that minute to pass. So it's just, if you're clear with what you will and won't do, it's very important. So you'll see I have that section there. What boundaries do you plan to set with your mentee? And you can fill that in now. I really encourage you to. And the rest of the questions there. And then we'll go through these specific questions when we have our Zoom meeting. So if you could do that now, that would be great. Last little section, we have a few things around physical touch. So it's if a mentee or if a student is reaching out for you, reaching out for a cuddle, it's definitely okay for you to respond like a human being. We're not robots. And for some students, that might be the only time they ever do that with another adult. We recommend a side hug in that case. And in all circumstances, the mentee must be the one initiating the physical touch and try as best you can to make it a public space. So the safe areas, elbows, shoulders, hands, and the upper back. Just really important to keep that in mind. Gifts are great to give and receive, and we encourage our mentors to give their mentees a birthday present or even a Christmas present. We used to say like $15, $10, but it is completely up to you. We probably would say no more than $20. And look, if you can make something, then that's awesome as well, because that sort of shows gift giving doesn't have to be just material things. Confidentiality, I touched on at the very start of our training. So confidentiality is a really important part of mentoring. So if your mentee tells you about stories about their friends, yucky names that their friends called them, or a fight they might have had with their friend, or personal issues that are just their own, that's not the sort of information that I need to know. So there needs to be a sense of trust within the mentoring relationship. However, that trust is overridden by a duty of care. So if your mentee tells you something and you feel like they're not going to be made safe, or that something bad might happen to them to cause them to not be safe, or somebody else, you have a duty of care to report that and pass that information on. Now, you needn't worry, because when we have our agreement meeting at the very start of the session, our mentor coordinators go over this really methodically. They want the students to know that your secrets are safe with them. Sorry, their secrets are safe with you, but only up to a point. And up until that point, you will have to break their confidentiality. We talk a lot about it in the agreement meeting, and every single student knows exactly what I'm talking about. And some of them, you can almost see them thinking, well, I'm not going to tell them about this that happens at home, and I'm not going to tell them about that. So it's really important to be aware of that. We have had some mentors in the past that have kept really dangerous information in because they haven't wanted to break confidentiality. You must tell us if your mentee is not going to be looked after, if they're not safe, if there's criminal activity involved. Absolutely pass that information on. Little things like who they have a crush on, or a really scary dream they had. That stuff we don't need to know about, just the bigger things. Caring for yourself. So some of you might find that your mentee and you have this wonderful relationship, and every time you see your mentee, you feel rejuvenated and light and happy. Some of you might find that when you meet with your mentee, you feel quite heavy. Some mentees have higher situations or they go through more difficult seasons. I would say all mentees would have low days. So it's important to know that when that does happen, just to look after yourself. Have fun with your mentee. You don't need to be sitting down in a counseling session with them for an hour. You can, chat to them about how life is going, but my goodness, you are an adult there just for them to do whatever they like. For goodness sake, have fun. Get out the bubbles, get out the Play-Doh, read them stories, play games with them. It's just such an opportunity for you, again, to be a child. Um, with none of the responsibility of being a parent and all of the joy. So I really encourage you to, during your mentoring time, just to keep it light and make the most of it. You can see on page 27, we have an exercise that I'd like you to do around self-care. This is just a great exercise to do, even when you're not mentoring. Think about the different aspects of your body, your career, your mind, your emotions, your social sphere, and think about which ways you do practice self-care and how you'd like to potentially improve some of them. So that is now the end of Introduction to Mentoring. Our next module is child development and attachment, and that's a really important module. I hope you've enjoyed this little introduction to mentoring, and I hope that childhood development and attachment is good too. Thanks so much, guys.